Good morning, everybody. Happy Saturday, September 9th. This is the Spartan. Um, I don't know. I don't think this will be a long one, but there was a lot of news, and I kind of stopped myself. I didn't want to put out a 40-minute, 50-minute plus recap. I'm trying to keep these morning updates under 30 minutes, just to give you the kind of high points from the previous day. That's losses, that sort of thing. Give you enough information to look further into things if it interests you, or at least give you the water cooler conversation. maybe maybe not around a water cooler on Saturday so much, but anyways. So to start with, the losses over the last 24 hours. Again, I would say on the heavier side overall, you have 600 troop losses. Now, apparently, the Ministry of Defense for Ukraine has changed it from liquidated to just losses. So may start to. I mean, there's always been a question on what is a sort of a permanent 200 loss versus what is a a serious injury, an injury that removes somebody off the battlefield, that sort of thing. 270,000 200s liquidations does seem to be on the high side in one aspect. If you just think about it, it's like really 200 over a quarter a million men gone. But then on the flip side, if you look at there's been so many breakdowns of different sort of losses, whether it's in an area battle, that sort of thing. And Bakhmut is one of the ones that stands out for me. Is that the Wagner group estimated they had 20,000 men roughly in country, and yes, it could have been 10, it could have been 30, but the educated guesses and estimates put them around 20,000. In addition, they withdrew upwards of 50 to 70,000 people out of prisons across Russia to come and fight for 6 months and then have their prison sentence basically commuted, waived, eliminated, whatever you want to call it. On top of that, regular Russian forces were around Bakhmut. Wagner was around Bakhmut. The VDV was around Bakhmut. The 155th Marine, I believe, there was other units around Bakhmut. So all these different units around Bakhmut, and the losses and actually liquidated losses on the low side have been estimated at 40,000, and the high side is 70,000. So that's one city over 1 year and a bit. Call it 40,000 people lost their lives just in that one city. And then you think about Severodonetsk and Lysychansk and Kherson and Kharkiv and the Chernobyl and and Luhansk and all the different oblasts, and then you think over 18 months. Well, if the Russians can lose 40,000 people minimum, and I've seen incredible estimates upwards of 70,000 just around the Bakhmut Soledar area, can they lose 270,000 in the entire country of Ukraine over 18 months? Yeah, possibly. But anyways, one will never know. We won't know the Ukrainian losses. I put the Ukrainian losses at around for every 7 Russians, there's 1 Ukrainian lost, whether it's killed or injured, KIA or WIA. Anyways, just food for thought. But 600 men, 15 tanks over the last 24 hours, which is huge. 15 tanks, it doesn't sound like a lot compared to some of the other pieces of equipment, but tank losses have typically been in the 1 to 5 range. So 15 tanks is huge. 13 APVs, a little lower. 36 artillery systems. It might be approaching a record. I don't know if that's a record or not. 3 MLRS in one day. MLRS losses are just over 1 a day on average. right? So we're at day 563. We got 757 MLRS. So you're losing like 1.2 or something like that MLRS per day. So when you have three, huge. One anti-aircraft warfare system. Those also are less than one a day losing. They're extremely expensive, extremely rare, hard to replace, etc. So every one of those is fantastic, and that basically frees up the airspace for drains, drones and planes from the Ukrainian military to whether it is fly deeper missions, longer missions, higher missions, launch different munitions from a higher altitude, such as glide bombs and Storm Shadow and that sort of thing. Russian losses have now exceeded $83 billion. There you have $83.082 billion. That's US dollars, which is like 11 trillion US Russian rubles. So there you have it. Now, as the thumbnail shows, the next thing I want to get into is the Atacms. So before we get really into it, so there's typically, I think, three things that have happened with kind of new weapon systems into Ukraine, specifically if they might be controversial, secretive, that sort of thing. One is there tends to be, for a lot of them, there tends to be a big preamble, a big build up. It's a slow bleed over time. Yes, the tanks are coming. Yes, this system is coming. They're training, etc. That's like boiling the frog, right? So the Russians know it's coming. The Ukrainians know it's coming. The world know it's coming. Use the Abrams for as an example. And then or the leopards or etc. So they eventually get trained up, they show up. It's not a surprise to anybody in that mystery escalation from Russia, which is there's one piece of escalation left and they're not going to do it, but never happens, right? So that's kind of like the boiling the frog, slow bleed notification of what's coming. Number two is the completely secret one, where basically they get it into country, into the Ukrainian hands and in use before the Russians know about it. One, I believe, was the HIMARS. I think the HIMARS had about a 2-week leeway before it was official, and the other one was the HARM-88 anti-radiation missile, which basically nobody knew about until it actually I think was spotted on the pylon of a MiG-29, I believe it was. And then somebody basically confirmed it and said, yeah, that is that's a HARM-88 anti-radiation missile on a Ukrainian plane in country, and boom. So that's kind of how you get the secret ones in there, and basically they do some damage before the Russians know about them and can react. And then the other one, which is less frequent, I think, is the trial balloon one. And I think that maybe the Storm Shadow could fall into that, and the Atacms. And I think what that one is basically is somebody makes some noise that they're strongly thinking about it. Like I remember the British government basically saying, we are contemplating the Storm Shadow. And then there was like a lull. People talked about it. Of course, the Russians raised their usual concerns or whatever, and then lo and behold, wasn't too serious. Nobody was too worried about it, and the Storm Shadow showed up. I believe that's what's happening with the Atacms now. So the U.S. military, like every other military in the world, is very good at grabbing a reporter, leaking a story, floating a trial balloon, seeing how it's received, both by adversaries, allies, etc. And so ABC News got the scoop on this one, which was basically that the U.S. is likely to send long-range Atacms to the Ukraine for the first time, quoted anonymous officials. This one's pretty specific. So this wasn't just this isn't just one of those rumors like where it's like an anonymous source saying it could be It's potentially going to be on the table sometime in the future, and we might consider whatever. This basically says they're coming. So, and right here, this is the direct quote from that unnamed official. They are coming, said one official who has access to security assistance plan. The official noted that, as always, such plans are subject to change until officially announced. So you can say they're coming, then you can pull them back out. A second official said the missiles are on the table and likely to be included in an upcoming security assistance package, adding that the final decision has not been made. So basically, what this tells me is that whether it's Milley, whether it's Lloyd Austin, whether it's you know other military commanders, that sort of thing, somebody has made the recommendation, and somebody who was probably a no previously has now switched to the yes camp and has made a recommendation to include Atacms in upcoming packages, and has presented that, most likely 100% has already presented that to President Biden for official sign off. And if they make a strong recommendation, it's unanimous voices around the table. It's typically going to be a yes. Sometimes politicians will come back and say, we want to float it first, or let's engage with some allies, make sure they're good with it, that sort of thing. But this is the way we're going to get the word out there. It's really good news. It's not a panacea. It's not the game changer that it was kind of made out to be in the past. A couple of things about it. First of all, it is a long range piece of munition. It's 300 kilometers, 190 miles, which exceeds the Storm Shadow. Depending on the variants of the French cruise missile, the Scalp, one of the Scalps goes 450 kilometers, I believe it is, and nobody knows for sure if the Ukrainians got that variant or not. But we'll assume this is either the longest or the second longest piece of Western munitions that have been supplied, that will be supplied to Ukraine. Oh, something else. One more thing I wanted to read you. Yeah, so, they're positing basically here, I think the specific targets in Crimea that the Atacms could target would be command and control logistics hubs, especially ammunition facilities and air bases, said Mick Mulroy, ABC News contributor, who served as a CIA officer and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. So he kind of knows what he's talking about. Crimea is chock full of military bases and logistics hubs, and it's a target-rich environment, and the Ukrainians have been hitting them, and they've got fantastic intelligence to know what's there, what they haven't hit. They've put drones, they've taken out S-400s in Crimea, they've taken out people in Crimea, they've landed boots on the ground in special operations and removed them. So a little bit more about the Atacms. One is the fact that it is an 820,000 US dollar piece of kit. The number that have been built, there are variants of the Atacms, and I'm not going to go into the rabbit hole, but there's M39 all the way up to M57E1. Roughly 4,000 of them have been built. Flight ceiling is 160,000 feet, which exceeds, I think, just about everything on the plate of Russian anti-aircraft defense systems until it basically comes back into on its descent, if you want to call it that. These are ballistic arc missiles, rocket assisted, of course, GPS guided, and internal GPS aided internal navigation guidance. They can be launched by the HIMARS and the M270, or the Mars, the the European version, which is the tracked one, and the US is the wheeled one. It's 13 feet long, 24 inches in diameter, 55-inch wingspan. What is it? The mass is 3,690 pounds. It's going to do a lot of damage. These are devastating pieces of kit. The U.S. is no longer making them for internal use, consumption, whatever you want to call it. They do still have an export market that's available. The Atacms is being replaced. So these are basically, if you want to call them, mothballed, quasi-mothballed weapon systems. One thing that I think is really interesting that nobody knows about, but as you know, that there was a kabuki dance or a chess game that was played between the U.S. and the Germans regarding the tanks, and the same sort of thing has kind of gone on with jets, where the Germans, for example, said, we're not giving Leopards until the U.S. agrees that they're giving Abrams. U.S. steps up and says, fine, we're going to give 31 Abrams. Boom, all of a sudden the Germans are giving Leopards A2s, A1s, and freeing up all of the other countries that have Leopards or can get their hands on Leopards to supply them to Ukraine as well. Broke the dam. F-16 was announced, and then all of a sudden, Russians or Ukrainians are being offered training sessions on the Gripen and the Eurofighter, etc. So in this case, there's one little piece of kit left. If you guys can guess what it is before I say it, but so the Ukrainians had a shopping list. They wanted cruise missiles. They wanted the Atacms. They wanted fourth generation fighters, which was the F-16. Cluster munitions, all the main battle tanks, and there's one other small wish list item out there, which is the German cruise missile. And I'm just wondering, were the Germans holding back on stepping up and offering up their variant of the Storm Shadow until the U.S. offered up the Atacms? So we'll see if those are the last two dominoes to fall, and then after that, the Ukrainians basically have everything that they want on the way or in country already. They may not have the volume of everything that they want, but that was the other thing that I wanted to mention too is it says here that there's about 3,700 Atacms that have been produced. It might be more. I'm not quite sure. You can. WikiLeaks is good, but it's not. You can't say it's engraved in stone. But the U.S. also said in the ABC article that they stumbled across some additional Atacms that they didn't know they had. So I don't know if that's to soften the blow to say, well, this is why we're actually stepping up and offering the Atacms, because we've got more than we thought. We have a strategic reserve that's going to keep us safe, sort of thing, whatever. But anyway, so that 3,700 was the known number. We'll say there was another reserve of them, in South Korea or in some bunker somewhere or whatever. But anyways, they've got more than they thought that they had. So, and hopefully those are farmed out to Ukraine soon, especially before the end of the year. They've got another 20 days or so to spend another $4 to $5 billion from the allotted funds, and then next year's funding should kick in hopefully shortly after that. But ideally, the Atacms would be in one of the last announced packages for the 2023 military assistance tranches, if you want to call it that. Where can the Atacms reach? Ta-da! Everywhere. So this is basically using Deep State's map, using the distance for the Atacms, which is 190 miles, 300 kilometers. Of course, you're not going to put it directly on the border and make it a risk. But if you just to show you that if you were to get it on the right bank of the Dnieper River with a little bit of a buffer there, it's basically reaching all of Crimea, all of the occupied territories there. Again, move it here, gives you a little bit of a buffer. It's not right on the border. It's got probably 5 to 10 kilometers there. It's reaching the Kerch Bridge. And obviously, boom, park it there, park it here. Like you can give it such a safety buffer that you can drop an Atacms on everywhere except for the southern parts of Crimea with, you know, Zaporizhia. You could launch them from Zaporizhia and hit most of the Russian troops in country, right? So, fantastic piece of kit. And again, the cruise missiles, they have a horizontal, smart approach to their targets. The Atacms has a ballistic arch to its targets, so it's basically two different types of approach to the target. It is extremely fast. It's a Mach 3, whereas the cruise missiles are below the speed of sound, right? So while this one might be easier targeted and hit with a high-end system like an S-400 on its reentry, it has a different approach than either the decoys or the cruise missiles. So what you could basically do is the Ukrainians have a decoy missile that they fire that basically can mimic anything. So they fire a decoy missile in and make it look like it's a MiG-29 or a couple of MiG-29s. They fire that in to draw the radar, the S-400 radar's attention. They then fire a couple of Harm 88s in to take out that S-400. Follow that with a Storm Shadow. Storm Shadow's coming in at 30 to 300 meters above the ground. It's terrain hugging, GPS guided as well, and then line of sight guided as well. And then following that in, you go high with the Atacms. So you've basically taken out the radar, and you've got two different vectors of approach from weapon systems to take out a high value target like a stationary ship, that Kerch Bridge, etc. So something to think about. Gives a lot of options. Unfortunately, in Kryvyi Rih today, in the past 24 hours, about 17 hours ago, another direct missile strike on civilians. 72 were injured, 1 was killed. So Russian-style terrorism. Discretion is advised. This is in Kryvyi Rih, and you can see these dogs. They hear the missile coming just before it strikes. And this is a town, a market, whatever. There's no military targets. And that is a huge, huge strike. That is a large... That's not a Shaheed. That's going to be, a Kinjal, Iskander, something. Devastating. That's what they fight for. In other news, the Russians apparently run the most successful election system in the world because they opened up polling booths in the occupied Ukraine regions, occupied regions of Ukraine, and just 3 minutes after the in-person polling booths open, not vote by mail, in person, 53% of voters had already voted in Kherson. In the DPR, 45%. In the LPR, 26%. Zaporizhia, 28%. That is 3 minutes after the polling
Школа не мог пройти выборы сегодня. Смотрите сюда, как открылись участки. У них уже Запорожская область 28%.
They must have been lined up down the road and had one polling worker for every voter. That sounds really legitimate.
Уже проголосовала явка, представляете?
The Russians are the gold standard as far as elections go.
Алкаши одни у нас тут. Никто не пошел на выборы. 26%.
That's all the results popping in. Like imagine being one of those reporters and spewing that out. Okay, the polls are open and 53% of people have voted. And they're all for Putin. Okay, so one of the things that we talk about all the time is all of the artillery and MLRS systems hit, and you keep wondering, like, who's hitting them, how are they hitting them, whatever. Well, it's 90% of it apparently is either coming from drone assisted, drone spotted artillery strikes and or FPVs. Here is an FPV strike on a 2S4 tool pen, which precisely hit a 240 millimeter shell. So this is a 240 millimeter mortar. It is a heavy mortar. It does a lot of damage. It fires a lot of shells, rapid fire, far distance. And the one thing that you should probably never do with a tool pen is store your ammo on top. Did you see that? Look right there. One of the 240 millimeter mortar rounds is right on top, and the FPV is going right for the fuse. And boom. One more time. Hits it directly, and no more tool pen. Same thing. So the TOS flamethrower, right? This is, these things are deadly, devastating, deadly, horrible machines. They drop thermobaric bombs onto cities, towns, people, troops, etc. They basically suck the oxygen out of the air. So they are a high value target. And kudos to the 27th Brigade who detected and destroyed TOS 1A. I can never Soltspjok MRS. I can never, just a flamethrower. So it's right, it's hard to see, but it's right in the crosshairs. Boom. And when you hit these TOS flamethrowers on the top, once you ignite the missiles, they're done. And the missiles start to launch, the ones that get destroyed right away. It better not be copyrighted. I just thought about that. Too late now. I'm in. There you go. One less TOS to worry about. Fantastic. So in other news, so you're going to see, and unfortunately some people are not going to do the research, and you're going to see someone state to you that these are the M1A1 Abrams tanks on their way to Ukraine. These are, in fact, the M1A2 SEP V3 variants. They are painted in a scheme only 2 units have in the U.S. military. One is the 3rd ID, the 3rd Infantry Division, and the other one is the 278th Armored Cavalry Regiment, the ACR. So, what does this mean? Nothing. We don't know where this is. It hasn't been geolocated. Could these be on the way to somebody to then replace the ones that they're giving up to the Ukrainians? Possibly. Could this just be a standard movement of, the 3ID or the 278th ACR moving from one location to another, from Ramstein to Poland, from X to Y, whatever? Yes, and this is just their equipment logistics train catching up or leading them. Yes, absolutely. But it's still nice to see. So these are 2A1s. These are not 1A1s. A tank expert source that I read basically said that you can tell by the scheme, the camo scheme, and as well as something to do with the commander's patch that differs it from the 1A1, and I'm not there yet. So I just wanted to show you that. And for anybody who then reads other posts online or whatever, said, that definitely say, here's the tanks on the way to Ukraine. Not the case. The Ukrainian military has asked for the training to be extended by another couple of weeks. I don't feel that they feel they're comfortable enough that everybody's up to speed. These are the most complex tanks on the planet, bar none. They're the most complex electronics, almost avionics, because they've got a jet engine inside them, optics, etc. The logistics chain, everything is very, very complex about these tanks. So basically, it looks like, if I'm guessing that the Ukrainian military touched base with some of the tank crews that were training up and asked for their comfort level. They basically said, maybe we're not there yet, and asked for permission to train a little longer. And so that's happening. So the expected mid-September delivery of these tanks onto the battlefield might be delayed by a bit. The tanks will still show up where they were supposed to go, when they were supposed to go, as far as to Poland, for example. But to see them on the battlefield, if we were expecting, pick a number, September 15th, it'll be delayed by a couple of weeks due to the training extension. Yesterday, satellite imagery showed Ukraine advance to and into the northwestern edge of Novomayorska. This is Andrew Petra, best mapper on the planet. He very conservatively mapped this. He could tell from the evidence alone that Ukraine had entered the town yesterday. So you'll see people talking about this town being liberated. Where is that town? It is right here, inside Russian-controlled territory. It gives you a sense of where it is. So there's a blue arrow that Andrew had put on the map saying the Ukrainians were advancing. Apparently the Russians are advancing that way too, which makes a lot of sense. They tend to counterattack opposite of where attacks are coming from to try to draw your attention away. But anyway, so you're going to see at least another Ukrainian town liberated. Second last thing I wanted to show you, here's a new map of Western Europe and Russia. As you can see here, that's Russia. That is not Russia. That's the Black Sea. It's not Russian. That's not Russian. That's not Russian. That's the Baltic Sea, not Russian. This is not Russia. Also, no. Does it look like Russia? No. Still not. Also not. Nah. And also, this is not. So there you go. That's just for some of the Russian people that you're going to deal with that are not quite clear on the current and historical maps, and this should be something that you can direct them towards. And last, little feel-good video. One sec. Oh. So, what defines the natural state of humans? What drives them? Intelligence, common sense, fear, love. Nowadays, we Ukrainians, on the one hand, are not in the mood for philosophy. On the other hand, the existential situation we live in every day for so long on the edge of life and death makes us think about real values, the meaning of life, and about the future. Ponder on who we are and what we live for. Stop. Hate. We need love and unity. Hands together and a big heart. Truly love that. That is it for today, or at least for this morning. Tell someone you love them. Slava Ukraini.